Good morning.
Boker Tov, how are you?
I'm not dancing, but I'm okay.
That's good. Good. No football for you either.
No football either, right?
It's off season. You're not allowed to play now.
Right. I'm really sad. This is the last class.
Well, I appreciate that. We have at least two sessions, April 10th and the 24th. I'll talk to everybody about this on the afterlife.
Oh, okay.
All right, so
Okay,
the
good.
people are there. But I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, I really have been enjoying it.
Thank you.
I have a lot to say about today's class.
Good.
Probably I'm been in Houston longer than anybody else on the screen. So.
I love it. I'm gonna do some basics and I'll give a little bit of background and I'll leave some time and
Okay.
yeah. I've learned a lot about Houston in my studies and preparation, so it's good.
Mm-hmm. So I can remember so clearly the congregational meeting when there was an uproar because the Rabbi Kahana of blessed memory had gone to Birmingham. Oh yeah.
And wow. So look, I'm putting down as I have it. Beth Israel was the first congregation. From there came Adat Yeshurun, which is Beth Yeshurun. From there broke off Brit Shalom.
No, from Beth Israel came Emmanuel.
Both. Adat in the 1800s. Adat is a break off. Okay. And then so yes, and then so also from Beth Israel came Houston Congregation for Reform Judaism.
Right, much later. Yeah.
Right. So Beth Yeshurun became Brit Shalom, which also had a broke off into Or Ami. Emmanuel had a break off into Shema Kolenu.
Right.
Right. It's
and then we had an influx from the Sephardic community and the and the Orthodox community.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And when Beth Yeshurun was founded as a break off from Beth Israel, it was an Orthodox congregation, and Beth Israel started it as an Orthodox congregation.
Right, well, because there wasn't any other choice.
Right. Yep. So I'll share some of that today, but it is amazing. It's just one break off from another.
Right.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good to see everybody.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's all right.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Hello.
Boker Tov, Suzanne.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Hello, Suzanne.
Hi. I see Bill and Linda there, and I see Natalie. Good morning, Natalie.
Is this romper room?
Yeah. And Martin. Hey, I can get worse if you want me to.
I remember growing up, I see Suzanne, and I see.
You're probably a little bit too young to remember the Howdy Doody show.
Just slightly, yes.
And I was big surprised. My parents got tickets for me and another friend of mine. We were actually in the
peanut gallery.
Oh yeah.
Peanut gallery.
Wow.
And it was really, really exciting. And I'm firmly convinced that all of the not pleasant things that have happened to me since then, and I couldn't have been more than 4 at that time, are based on the fact that Buffalo Bob I raised my hand and he didn't call on me.
Causality is clear.
Exactly. What more can I say? This is just.
So Martin, I see Good morning. I see you. I want to talk with you this week about the afterlife materials and getting you scheduled in.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And then I just want to say good morning, everybody. I'm going to get off video and audio. I've got a super busy morning and have to leave early, but I'll be here in just you won't see me or hear me, which is a good thing.
No, we're glad you're here.
Never, never.
No, Phyllis, no.
Glad
See
you're
you
here.
tomorrow, see you tomorrow, Phyllis?
I hope so.
Yeah, I think a couple of weeks I'm doing the sisterhood study group. I'm doing that in a couple of weeks as well. We're going to look at the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
What's that?
And we're coming back to Bris Shalom.
Yeah,
the first
I picked my 5 favorites. The others I ignore.
Well, they keep telling you that, in all the spots that you read it in the Bible, so I guess that's okay.
Right. That stealing thing really gets on my nerves.
Thy father and mother, there were times when that was a bit difficult.
Good morning to Dallas.
Good morning, dear. How are you?
Doing wonderfully. All good. We'll talk a little
Good.
Dallas too today.
Oh, okay.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Let me-
Hi, Lena. It's nice to
Hi, Lena.
see you.
Good morning. Good morning.
This native Texan can't wait to hear about the history of Jews in Texas.
I'm going to give you some I'll give you a good background, and then we'll open the floor because I've got to guess there's a lot of wisdom sitting here in this room.
I think we're all I know we're all looking forward to this.
Yes, there are a lot of opinion.
are
We will-
indeed.
Mark, it's a lot of opinion, and we'll judge wisdom afterwards.
That's exactly.
as
We're
you
not
know,
taking a vote, so don't be afraid to share.
And as you know, not a quiet bunch.
There's David.
Well, as someone who has absolutely no ties to Texas, has only been here for 6 years, we will just sit back and listen.
There's a lot of experience in this screen.
I know.
Absolutely.
I'm going back into the 1500s, so I doubt it.
Yeah,
Close, but no cigar.
even I wasn't around then.
Give people a couple more minutes to sign on. Good morning, Lawrence.
Hey, good morning.
Very nice. Very nice.
Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov.
Morning.
Boker Tov.
I think they're.
Morning.
Morning, Jeff.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Perfect time for this, too.
Rodeo.
Did you plan it?
It's Tejano Day at the rodeo today. How come there's no Jewish Day at the rodeo?
I think we could just kind
I
of.
think we're going to discover why, right?
They're afraid we'll come and sacrifice all the animals.
Unless you're wearing the wrong hat.
Oh, I have my hat. I can go get my hat. I have the hat.
Seeing you in that hat, it's a strange sight.
Perhaps we could all head over and search for a red heifer.
Right, the Jews didn't ride the.
Thank God I
bronco, they
wasn't
stole the
drinking my
Western
coffee yet.
folks.
There are people who want to find one. We should be very afraid of those people.
Yes, very.
Yeah.
All right, my friends. So as a couple things, as I said just a few minutes ago, I'm going to do somewhat of an introduction here. I've got about 30, 40 minutes worth of material. And then I want to open the floor because there is a lot of experience here. Certainly not from the 1500s, but certainly the last 50 years, 60 years for sure. So let's go back to the very beginning and talk about, you'll see there's a lot of, they may have been Jewish. They may have been Jewish. They may have been Jewish in the early years. And then it gets more solidified. So the earliest Jewish history of Jews in Texas is sort of hidden in the shadow of Mexico, when conquistadors and other Spaniards came to the New World in search of God, gold, and glory. But with that came the cruelties of the Inquisition. And so although we know there were Jews present really from very beginning times, they remained hidden because discovery meant repression and often death. And so that leads to why there's a lot of a lack of clarity as to when Jews really first arrived. The first governor of the new Kingdom of Leon, which included parts of what is now South Texas, including San Antonio and northern Mexico, the first governor was a Portuguese-born new Christian with Jewish roots by the name of Don Luis de Carvajal. And by 828, he had already established himself in Spain as a successful merchant and a sea captain. And he formed a partnership with another new Christian, and he married the partner's daughter. Soon after the wedding, Carvajal was shocked to learn that his new wife was actually devoted to Judaism. 1567, he leaves his wife behind and he heads for, quote, New Spain, Mexico, southern Texas. 1579, he's appointed by King Philip as the governor of this new kingdom, and he has the right to bring 100 to 200 people at his own expense with him. Between 100 and 200 families come with him, and among them, many members of his own family who were practicing Jews. Why that's important, let me share with you. Because Carvajal's niece, Isabel, is arrested in 1589 and under torture denounces him along with her mother, her two sisters, and her brothers. And in 1590, Carvajal is convicted of harboring Judaizers. That was the label they used, and was sentenced to a year in prison, followed by 6 years in exile. He died in that year in prison. Over 100 of the colonists were also denounced, and most confessed. On December 7th, 1596, his wife, his sons, his daughters were executed along with 45 other Judaizers. So you can imagine, you understand why no one was claiming I'm a Jew. Okay, no one was rushing to announce it. So our records are unclear. The first North American Jew known to have come to Texas was a gentleman by the name of Captain Samuel Noah. He came from New York. He commanded a Mexican force against Spain in San Antonio in 1811, though he remained only briefly. So we've jumped more than 200 years at this point, okay? After Mexico, then including Texas, achieves independence from Spain in 1821, a small number of individuals, perhaps no more than 10 or 20, of Jewish background appeared in the region, though none were really what we would call practicing Jews openly or in any way consistently. 1821, December, Stephen F. Austin arrives with his first colonists, and he drafts the Isaacs family as part of his colony. Isaacs is widely considered to be Texas's first Jewish settler, though it's unclear once again, because we have no documents that are primary sources to prove that. But he's generally accepted as the first.
Just Isaacs. You didn't get the first name.
I didn't, you know what? I don't know that I had his first name. Let me see if I have it here. Nope, I don't have his first name. I apologize. The first report of self-identifying Jews was in early 1830s at Velasco, which is on the Gulf Coast near present-day Fremont, where Abraham Labatt, who had been active in the Jewish communities all over the country, recognized two residents, Jacob Henry and Jacob Lyons, as fellow Jews. So that's the first we've got, and that's the 1830s in terms of really having evidence per se. A handful of Jews from the United States fought in the Texas War of Independence for Mexico, some with James Fannin and Goliad, and others at the Battle of San Jacinto. So we have some Jews involved. Moses Albert Levy was among the 300 men at the siege of Bexar in December of 1835, which preceded the Battle of the Alamo a year later. Levy tended to the wounded. He fought alongside the other soldiers, and he ultimately became Sam Houston's Surgeon General. In 1836, Levy enlisted in the Texas Navy, and when his warship Independence was attacked, he was imprisoned, but he escaped swimming across the Rio Grande. All right, so this is very early. This is, at this point, when we're talking about Jews, we're talking in the handfuls.
Oh, Cantor?
Yes.
Cantor, just one thing, when you say it's not Bexar, it's there, the X is silent.
Say it
Like
again.
there- When you say Bexar, B-E-X-A-R, it's actually there, the X is silent.
It's just Bear?
Yeah.
All right.
Bear County, like Bear County. And,
Oh, okay. Every time I talk about, you'll see later, when I first came to Texas, I referred to Lubbock, and I got taken to task.
It's like Houston for Houston.
That's
or-
right. There you go. Yeah, I grew up near Houston Street. Right,
Go.
exactly.
Right.
I learn all about Texas every time I make some kind of goofy mistake. This is great. Right. Within the let's see, where did I leave off? Okay, so many remained after the new republic, which guaranteed constitutionally religious freedom, and so it began to attract more Jewish settlers, particularly among Central European immigrants who had lived in the U.S. So we're talking mostly German. This is not the large spread Eastern European population. This is more the central population. With independence won, the Republic of Texas is eager to attract Anglos by giving development contracts to land agents. Drawn by Texas' promise and fertility, thousands of immigrants, including Jews, arrived to build towns and cities and farms and ranches. Right? It's free land. Come on down. 1846, Texas joins the United States, and the Jewish population continues to grow faster and faster. As Jews gather in the largest cities, they began, in a sense, to be part of shaping the rudiments of life in those communities. In Galveston, the Dyers and the Ostermans, who arrived in Texas in 1839, formed the core of the growing Jewish merchant class that also included Michael Seligson, who ultimately was elected Galveston's mayor in 1853. He's the first of a number of Jews who became mayor in Galveston. When a 6-year-old child in the Dyer family passed away in 1852, the family established the first Jewish cemetery in Texas in Galveston. I did a funeral there a couple of years ago. It was land donated by Osterman, and they invited they invited a rabbi from New Orleans who performed what we believe is the first recorded Jewish service in Texas. All right. In Houston, the city's first permanent Jewish residents, Louis and Mary Levy, purchased a plot of land and to use as a cemetery in 1844. So you see the pattern. What's the first thing Jews set up in a community? It's a cemetery. It's not a synagogue. It's a cemetery. 1850, Levy wrote, he's trying to bring other Jews in. He wrote, thousands of acres of land can be bought with settled portions of the state for the small sum of 25 cents to $1 per acre. Where do I sign up? All right. Inducements in the press from men like Levy led Texas fever, and the Lone Star State led the Texas fever, and Texas becomes the destination of Jewish adventurers, opportunists, and pioneers. Again, we're in the very early stages. 1850, Jews come to Texas, and needless to say, they find no real communal life. All right, there's nothing in place. You find scatterings of Jewish families in places like Galveston, Houston, and San Antonio. And as they settled in Texas, many continued to practice practice Judaism, but there were no institutions in place, and they had to create everything anew. 1855, Louis Levy spearheads the creation of the Hebrew Benevolent Society, which is aimed at helping poor Jews and the bereaved. 1856, Henry Mayer and Louis Zork began meeting for the first time an informal congregation holding services in the home of the mayors. And 3 years later, Beth Israel formally is chartered as the state's first Jewish congregation. Later settlers, such as the Simon family, led by Alex Simon, come in the 1860s, and they contribute to the construction of synagogues and monuments such as the Simon Theater. Jewish communal institutions are flourishing alongside the synagogues. You've got B'nai B'rith chapters that were showing up in every major city. There were 20 Texas lodges by 1900. 1898, the first chapter of the Council of Jewish Women was formed in Tyler, or as my beloved former secretary in Dallas used to call it, Tyler. In 1908, the Texas Jewish Herald was established in Houston. All right, today we call it the Jewish Herald Voice. All right, and it's one of the longest running Jewish newspapers in the country. You know what its future is, like many newspapers, is up in the air at this point, because that's just the nature of the business. But it's been around for quite a while. 1856, the first organized Jewish services are held in the home of Galveston resident Isidore Dyer. These services would eventually lead to the founding, now listen to this, of Texas's first and oldest Reform congregation, Temple B'nai Israel, in 1868. Now that seems to conflict with what you heard earlier. But the reality is, when Beth Israel was formed in 1859, by the way, they claim in 1854, and so there's a discrepancy, they were an Orthodox synagogue. So the first Reform synagogue was B'nai Israel in Galveston. By 1874, Beth Israel voted to change their affiliation to the fledgling Reform movement. And 5 years later, when the shamus was instructed by the board to ask worshipers to remove any head coverings, the transformation to Reform was complete. All right, so any comments thus far?
Yeah, Mark, when you say that Beth Israel was Orthodox in 1850 something or other, what's the word Orthodox? Did it exist yet?
No, but it was essentially of the traditional model. It was whatever the opposite of Reform was.
Yeah. In what year did you say Beth Israel transformed to Reform?
In 1874.
What year was it? What year was the National Council started in Tyler?
1898.
I never heard that. That's real interesting.
So if you go into Beth Israel, in one of their hallways, there's a terrific wall-based history of the congregation. It's fascinating.
Yep.
Yes, with pictures and everything. I've been there.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Yes.
Yep. So the Civil War obviously disrupted this whole process. Jews are divided in the political issues of slavery and secession. Some owned slaves, most did not. Some spoke out or voted against secessionism. Others fought in the Confederate and Union armies. And so it's a period of a lot of confusion and a lot of disruption. When the war ends, Jewish veterans from both the Confederate and the Union armies returned to their homes in Texas, and others began a real migration to the state for the first time. Ironically, and sadly, while Jewish immigrants were traveling to Texas to gain their rights as landowners, other Texas ethnic groups were being denied the same rights. So Hispanics along the Texas-Mexico border tried to reclaim land that they thought said was theirs and was taken from them improperly. You can imagine with the Native Americans who were being driven out of Texas, what their claim to the land would be. But this is not what we see in Israel today with the Palestinians. This is not a new model, right? This is history, all right? The birth of the KKK brings a reign of violence and terror across the state, but it's aimed primarily at Blacks. And so while the Jewish population is growing and prospering, Blacks are leaving Texas in large numbers for better opportunities in places like Kansas. Many Jews choose to live in Galveston and San Antonio, at that time, the state's two largest cities. Others move, so you got the city life. Others are moving into the agricultural communities and towns to form businesses that follow the major railroad routes. All right. So as a new city is established or a new town is established, what you've got is people setting up shops. E.M. Kahn chose Dallas for his store because he said, quote, this is his quote, "People here walk fast and talk fast." In Houston, Jews helped organize the Ship Channel Company and the Board of Trade and Cotton Exchange. 1874, Temple Beth El in San Antonio is founded, followed by Temple Emmanuel of Dallas in 1875. 1891, a traditional group of men who've now come from Russia and Poland split off from Beth Israel, and they form a new Orthodox synagogue, Adat Yeshurun, or Adath Yeshurun, which is now Beth Yeshurun. Okay, so they began Orthodox. It's fascinating. I was sitting here a little earlier and I'm figuring this out. So Beth Israel, if I've got this correct, had the following three breakoffs: Beth Yeshurun, Emmanuel, HCRJ. From Emmanuel, break off Shema Kolenu. From Beth Yeshurun, break off Beth Brit Shalom. From break off from there from Orami. We Jews simply we are not very good at getting along. I suspect Dallas is no different.
Even at Young Israel, there's a break off.
Of course.
You know that? So it's common. It's tradition.
Common.
It's tradition.
It is. Yeah, there you go. It's a yes. I'm not standing on a roof and singing, but it's tradition.
Yes, when Temple Emmanuel got too big and Cherith Israel got too big, then there was, breakoffs into smaller congregations. Then when they got too big, there were more breakoffs from them. And
when you break off, it's nice to incorporate the word shalom in your break off.
Almost every synagogue that breaks off into the modern world has the word shalom in it. Yep. I'm not sure whether it's a statement of reality or a prayer.
Yeah, in Orthodox synagogues, as soon as they can almost balance the budget, then they split.
All right. The Reform movement actually was very well situated to Jewish life in Texas because it's primarily a non-Jewish world down here. Dietary laws, kashrut, were abandoned. Kosher meat either could not be obtained, or when it did arrive, it had spoiled in transportation. Sunday schools, choirs, sermons, and organs are all adopted in the manner of Christian churches. Those are not necessarily Jewish traditional behaviors. Sermons and choirs and organs in Sunday school were adopted from our Christian neighbors. All right. Reform rabbis often called themselves reverend, right? Because that was the title used in the larger world. Head coverings were no longer required or even permitted in the temples. And drastic, women actually sat next to the men. As in other southern and western states, Jews were initially attracted to Texas because of commercial opportunities. From the coastal commercial centers of Galveston and Houston, where Jews participated heavily in the cotton industry, Jewish retailers followed the state's burgeoning rail system, and by the early 20th century, Jews were present in over 70 communities, many times operating the only retail establishment in town. In the larger cities, Jews dominated the retail industry and built many of the state's premier retailing institutions. You're going to recognize a lot of these names: Sanger Brothers, Neiman Marcus. As these individuals prospered, Texas Jews built new temples and new synagogues to accommodate the larger population. And these edifices were impressive brick structures. The significance of that is it represents permanence. Jews were here to stay. They were the third religion, along with Protestantism and Catholicism. They became community builders and community leaders. All right, I'm going to keep going, and then we'll open unless there's any questions. Okay, Galveston Plan. Oh, Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, and you may get to it, but because I know it was like early 1900s, like when my grandparents came and so forth. One thing you said about, using the word reverend, that also applied, I know it to Ferret Israel with my great grandfather, to people they hired as rabbis who were not ordained, who came from the old country, because he was a reverend, not a rabbi when he came to Ferret.
Okay, all right. So it obviously had many uses. All right, so the Galveston Plan, financed and directed by New York's Jacob Schiff, sought to divert the flow of Jewish immigrants to the Texas Gulf Coast by bypassing the crowded ghettos of New York. Between 1908 and 1914, some 10,000 European Jews passed through the city of Galveston to destinations throughout the Western states. And Galveston was chosen for several reasons. One, it had existing rail connections to major cities in the Southwest and Midwest. So that's first, there's a railroad. Two, there was a German steamship line already making regular stops in Galveston. Three, and possibly most importantly, was the presence of a rabbi by the name of Henry Cohen, who served there for 18 years. Cohen had been active in the rebuilding efforts after the hurricane of 1900 that wiped out the city. He went and met every single ship that arrived and worked tirelessly to arrange for jobs and food and shelter for newcomers. And so you've got a number of factors that make Galveston the right place at the right time. It, however, does not live up, this plan, to Schiff's lofty expectations for a number of reasons. One, there's a tightening of immigration policies. Two, there's a change in Russian governmental policies. Three, American economic insecurity. Four, the duration and difficulty of the voyage. People stop coming. Five, the outbreak of World War I. And six, the enactment of federal immigration laws in the 1920s. All of those factors limited the numbers who actually made it here. But it's still in the 10,000. Joyce.
I was just going to tell you a story, a funny story. We came to Houston in 1967, and shortly after we came, we went to something at the Jewish Community Center. And we met an elderly man, and Bob asked him how he came to Houston. And he said he wanted to go to Houston Street, and they sent him to Houston instead.
Somebody's GPS wasn't working. Yes. The majority of newcomers who come to Texas in the early 1900s are Orthodox, adding new dimensions to the theological landscape. New congregations are formed, new organizations are formed, new ideas are emerging. And what you've got is a new world in which there's an unbridled growth that paves the way for political and professional life among the Jewish community. Now, interestingly today, although Texas now has the second largest population in the country, we have the 10th largest Jewish population. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the economy after World War II remained primarily agrarian for a long time. And migrants seeking merchant roles really didn't have the same kinds of opportunities. It wasn't a place. So people went to California, they went to Florida, where it was a little bit different in the nature of their business. It's primarily economic, as is everything else we've talked about. I want to shift tones a little bit and go into look at Zionism. The predominance of classical Reform Judaism in the mid-19th century in part explains the anti-Zionist sentiment that prevailed in Texas until World War II. But Zionist organizations were nonetheless here and had some strength during that time, often led by the European educated rabbis or an influx of Eastern European Jews. Dr. Sigmund Berg from Vienna founded the first local Zionist organization in Texas and possibly even in the United States in 1897. He did that in San Antonio. 8 years later, in 1905, the Texas Zionist Association was formed to coordinate Zionist efforts across the states. Obviously, there were more that were popping up. If there's a need to coordinate, they're popping up in many places. Also, this is led by Dr. Berg. This organization began in Houston at Anti-Semitism and supported not only a Jewish homeland in Palestine, but Hebrew schools and Young Judea chapters. So you're seeing the emergence of one organization after another. 1914, the state's first Hadassah chapter opens in Wharton. Did I say that right? Did I get that one right?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
In the decades preceding the creation of the state of Israel, the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine slowly gained in popularity, but not without heated debate, arguments, as Jews are so good at, which was often, unfortunately, shared publicly in the larger community. Many Reformed Jews at that time thought of themselves as Americans first and feared that the larger community would perceive Zionism as disloyalty. Beth Israel, again, this first synagogue in Texas, here in town, was torn asunder by its adoption of what they called the basic principles, one of which repudiated Zionism. Okay, now just to be fair, I've had this conversation with Rabbi Lyons. They are very pro-Israel today. All right, so let's not let me not understand times they do change, but in its formation, that's where Emmanuel comes from. That's, those are the big issues that drive those kinds of things. All right, anti-Semitism here in Texas. As soon as it became a state, it showed up. Judge Roy Bean's first act as justice of the peace was to shoot up the saloon shack of a Jewish competitor. During the 1920s, the KKK became influential in Texas. Billy Mayfield edited a weekly Klan newspaper here in Houston that regularly used anti-Semitic stereotypes to attack Jews as, quote, parasites only interested in extracting wealth from the community. In one of the articles he wrote, he said, there are lots of good Jews in Houston and all over Texas. You'll find them with tombstones over their head. Endearing. By 1924, fortunately, the Klan had lost much of its local support, and Mayfield's newspaper went out of business. Even during the time, however, that the KKK had influence, there were powerful Jews in the economy here in Texas. By the 1920s, big department stores in Houston, such as Foley's and Battlestein's, were owned by Jews. Brothers Simon and Tobias Sakowitz left Russia as young children, and in 1915 they opened a clothing store in Houston that eventually became Sakowitz's, became one of the finer department stores in the city. In 1959, they built a new flagship store on Westheimer Road, and 10 years later, the Galleria opened up right across the street from it. Unfortunately, Sakowitz expanded too much, and in the 1970s declared bankruptcy. They ended up selling to an Australian owner, and they went out of business for good in 1990. What you saw is many of these early Jewish communities that were growing were in the eastern part of the state, connected by railroads, and they were transforming towns into cities. By 1900, there were a lot of main street shops owned by Jewish merchants who were carving an important niche in the agricultural community. They sold household goods, clothing, agricultural tools to the families who were engaged in farming. They also sold luxury items such as confectionaries and liquor, china and crystal. There's a big difference. Some of the leading import-export businesses in Texas were owned by Jews. Moritz Copperol's coffee business was so successful that by the 1890s, Galveston was the 4th largest coffee market in the United States. Leon Blum developed the largest business in Texas, importing dry goods and exporting cotton from Galveston. The first chain store, Sanger Brothers, followed the path of the railroad. As tracks were built north of Houston, they would open a new store in each town along the way. Between 1865 and 1873, they opened stores in 13 different towns, including Waco and Dallas, where family members would go and run the operation. They were the Sangers were the first to adopt fixed prices. And in 1880, they opened a mail order department. 1884, they had the first catalog. By the 1890s, they had an annual sale of $1 million a year, obviously. They were the largest dry goods store west of the Mississippi. So there's many other Texas Jews who are establishing department and clothing stores across the state. You've got the Josky brothers promoting San Antonio's first international trade fair in 1888. In 1907, in Dallas, Herbert Marcus, Al Neiman, and Carrie Marcus Neiman opened Neiman Marcus's, which has grown into a national institution. By the 1920s, many Jews were living, because of all this, a very comfortable life. They'd been in the state for decades. They had numerous friends and relatives in other Texas cities with whom they shared this strong social bonds. But at the same time, most Jews were still struggling to earn a living, particularly those who were recent immigrants. They were busy working hard to establish themselves, to learn English, to get citizenship papers, and to educate their children. And so you have this Jewish concept of tzedakah and self-help manifested in the creation of the Hebrew Free Loan Society, which gave free loans to small businesses. In Houston and Dallas, Jewish homes for the aged were founded by philanthropists. I'm guessing that's Green and 7 Acres. Joe Weingarten was a Jewish immigrant.
No.
Yes, Judith.
Is there a Green Acres? That's a TV show. It was here.
Golden Acres in Dallas. You're right. Green Acres is Mr. Haney. Golden Acres and 7 Acres, not Green Acres. Oh yeah. Joe Weingarten was born in Poland and became a very successful grocery store owner. And he pioneered the innovations of cash and carry, self-service, and in the grocery stores here in Houston. And he became a local chain that reached 70 locations by the time of his death in 1967. He was active in Jewish social causes as well. Oil discovery in the state, and you've got new communities that sprout up in East and West Texas, and new synagogues follow. And you end up in places like synagogues in Amarillo, San Angelo, Wichita Falls, and I know it's Lubbock. Interfaith relations become more important as the Jews are in these communities where they are such a minority, and they go out into the communities in small towns, and rabbis become goodwill ambassadors, not only to their congregations, but to the larger outside world as well. You begin to see Jews making significant contributions to civic life. Julius Sheps, Fred Florence were leaders of the Dallas business community and helped to bring the Texas Centennial celebration to Dallas in 1936. And there's a section of Interstate 45 in Dallas that is named for Sheps due to his contributions. Several Jews have been elected to office. 35 different Texas cities have had a Jewish mayor. In 2009, Joe Strauss of San Antonio became Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives. United States Congressman Martin Frost, Robert Strauss, spent several years as head of the Democratic National Committee and made their mark on national politics. Recently, you have Michael Dell, who's the founder and CEO of Dell Corporation. In Austin, he has created an entire world of high-tech renaissance that it just permeates the environment there. Dell and his wife Susan have donated land to create the Jewish campus that is there, in which holds a synagogue and the JCC and all the different organizations that are on the one campus donated by the Dell family. He's also active in charity and civic affairs, including he funded the Dell Children's Hospital in Austin. He also funded the Dell Diamond, I didn't even know this, which supports the Round Rock Express AAA baseball team owned by Nolan Ryan and the family. So he's a fellow baseball fan. We like Michael Dell. There we go.
Now, how about the medical school?
Right, there you go. That's exactly, yes. Here in Houston, you've got Ben Taub. Taub was born and raised in Houston, became a leading real estate developer. He donated the land for the University of Houston when it was founded in 1936. He helped the Baylor College of Medicine move to Houston. He also founded we all know the public charity hospital that's here in town. Leopold Meyer was a major donor and fundraiser for the Texas Children's Hospital. He was also the longtime director of two of Houston's most iconic events, the Livestock Show and Rodeo. Everybody needs to go at least once. And the Pin Oak Horse Show, which I have not been to. What we've got is a community that's in constant growth. We've gone from 1960, about 60,000 to well over 170,000 in current times. But there's a trend. Cities such as Dallas, Houston, and Austin are blossoming and growing and expanding in terms of Jewish populations. Smaller cities and towns are experiencing declines. You have congregations that have closed in Wharton, in Laredo, Corsicana, in Corpus Christi, two congregations have merged, and that's going to happen in Galveston too. It's clear that the conservative synagogue is going to fold into the Reform synagogue relatively soon. All right, that's the overview. Now for the true wisdom. Who would like to share? Joyce, go ahead. Yours the first hand, and then Sandy, you're next.
Well, I'm always impressed or aware of the fact that Jews, especially in Houston, which is what I would know, are so prominent in the social justice field. Certainly in Brish Shalom, it's been very obvious, and that our congregants not only are involved, but they're leaders in the Brish Shalom field. And I can remember very clearly when Rabbi Kahana, blessed memory, went to Birmingham, and the reaction at Brish Shalom, that it was both positive and negative.
That's pretty much a historical response.
It was a great congressional meeting, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
it was something else. But we've always had in Brish Shalom, we've always had leaders of the social justice movement, and
nice. Sandy?
something to be proud of.
If you want to talk about a major figure in Texas, and that was Bernard Rappaport, who basically funded the Texas Observer, which was the main kind of liberal dissenting organ in Texas for decades.
I'm making notes as we go. Okay, Sandy, go ahead.
Okay, several somewhat disjointed things. But one of the other reasons why they chose Galveston was because New Orleans was possible, but New Orleans had a more organized Jewish community, and Jacob Schiff and his folks didn't want people to just come and stop where there was an organized Jewish community. They wanted them to go up to the Midwest and become farmers, like and our ancestors who couldn't own land for 1,000 years knew a lot about farming. Again, just a slight factoid, Foley's was actually not started by Jews. It was bought by Mr. Cohen. Then during World War II, it was bought by Federated Department Stores, whose chairman, Mr. Farkas, I think it's Farkas from Cincinnati, had a son at Ellington Air Force Base. He came to visit him and took a liking to Foley. So it's a little history.
Wow.
Growing up here in the 50s, a very high percentage of merchants were Jewish. Weingarten's was the biggest grocery chain by far. Joe Weingarten's son is a past president of British.
Is that Jack?
Yeah.
That's his son, Jack?
Jack. My earliest ancestors on my mother's side came through the port of Galveston, but they came before the Galveston Plan. Reuben Dow, my great-grandfather, came in 1903.
Wow.
It was interesting. Most of that side of the family came to the United States when Theodore Roosevelt was president. A lot of Jewish.
Sandy, is there a reason relative to Theodore Roosevelt?
It just was an interesting historical thing. It had nothing to do.
No causality. Okay.
My great grandmother had a lot of health problems, and she had to get out of Russia. And she had a brother who lived in Houston, and that's why they decided to come there. My grandmother Reuben Dow's daughter came in 1904, and she described coming on the ship and being sick for 2 weeks. They, of course, came steerage class. The only thing they had to eat was cold potatoes and herring. And if I can't get upgraded to business class when I cross the Atlantic, it's already, it's a big thing to me. So I like to put that in perspective. A lot of the merchants started as peddlers, and peddlers had a very important function. They came to throughout the agricultural areas, and they brought finished goods, and in trade, they took raw materials. And they also brought news. So people who became peddlers were very adventuresome. They knew they were not in a Jewish milieu. They went out there entirely for business. Jews did become important in my life. At least I was born in 46, so my perspective is the 1950s. Beth Israel did it. It was the basic principles of the more. They essentially hired Rabbi Schachtel to be the successor to Rabbi Barnston when their then assistant Rabbi Kahn was in the South Pacific as a chaplain, knowing that he was a Zionist and he would resign. And basically, Emmanuel formed around him and the Zionist principle. So a little bit of history there.
All right. I think I saw Martin's hand was next. And then
2 points. First of all, the Wieners are too modest to mention the Wiener stores that were very prominent in Houston when we came to live here in 1980. And one of the remarkable things I still recall about Wieners was not only the fact that it was a terrific store chain, especially for kids going back to school, but also that they closed the store on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yes. And a 2-page ad in the Houston Chronicle said, in observance of a religious holiday, Wiener stores will be closed. We were overwhelmingly impressed by the fact that they took that position. So the other thing, of course, is that the Wieners created the Wiener set schools. Yep. So in terms of the day school movement in Houston, the Wieners are heavily instrumental in setting that off. The other thing I would mention is that Jews in Houston are the ones that supported the initial Black Congress people that represented parts of Houston, Barbara Jordan, and then Mickey Leland, the seat that's now held by Sheila Jackson Lee. And at the time that Mickey was the rep for that that district. He used to come to Bristol every year to talk. We had a terrific relationship with Mickey Leland over the years.
Wow.
Just comment on that.
Okay, Leslie, I think you're next.
Uh,
If raise your hand, then if you have, yeah, and then Judith, you're next.
Two quick comments. Joyce's reference to Rabbi Kahana. I heard him speak to the 7th graders, and he told the story of he was going to the rabbinic assembly, and everything was going on with Martin Luther King and the riots and everything. And he said, we need to send rabbis to the South to help out. So they sent 10 rabbis. They met with Martin Luther King, who was in jail. And they said, Dr. King, what do you want us to do? And he said, go out and speak in the community. So then come Friday, all the rabbis had to go back to their communities because of Shabbos. So one of the rabbis from Alabama went back to his congregation. He goes to the synagogue and he takes out his keys to open up the shul, and the shul had changed all the locks. They were so embarrassed. Rabbi Kahana is picked up by his wife of blessed memory and Dr. Bernard Flans of blessed memory, who was the president. And he said, let me just go home and I'll freshen up. No, Rabbi, you have to come to the congregation. He comes to the congregation, you open the door, and he said you could swear it was Yom Kippur. There was such support, and our congregation became known in the city for doing all kinds of things related to, we rented out the Hebrew school to a Black Bible school during the day. And the congregation would say, Rabbi, go out and speak in the community and everything. And then the other thing about, what was I going to say? Rabbi Kahana, and I'll come back to it.
Okay, we'll come back. So Judith, I think you were next, please.
Okay, I have a lot to cover. I'm gonna make it as fast as I can.
Please.
Okay, first thing, Tiferet Israel, when they celebrated their 100th anniversary back in 1980, I think it was.
Right, that's in Dallas, right?
Yeah, it was the Orthodox synagogue in Dallas. Like you were saying, before, when I was growing up, there were 3 places in Dallas. There was Temple Emmanuel, Reformed, Shereth Israel, Conservative, and Tiferet Israel, which we called Orthodox. Now you'd call it traditional, which is where my grandparents went. And they had put a little, history in the front of the booklet and all that. And just like almost every congregation or every group of Jews in the host state, and I'm sure other states, the first thing Shereth did was buy land for a cemetery. They would have services in somebody's store or somebody's house. They always bought land for a cemetery. Second thing, there was a good book written by a woman who was part of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. It's out of print now, but if you grew up in Dallas or anything like that, it's called They Came to Stay, The Story of the Jews of Dallas from 1870 to 1997. Mentions everybody you named and a whole lot of other people. I also want to bring up, if anybody remembers, a movie called Hester Street that was about Jews in New York. There was a movie made by 2 filmmakers here in Dallas a few years later called West of Hester Street that, and I don't know if you can even see it now, that had Jewish people. My great uncle began with like a Seder in modern times, and then it went back into how the Jews got to Texas and everything. That was very interesting. Also, if anybody has seen, or if you haven't, you can probably find it online, a play called The Immigrant that is a wonderful telling, and it's based on a true story of a family in Texas that was Jewish, the only Jewish people in town. The man started with a push cart and then a little store and then a bigger store, and had children and everything. They lived their entire lives in this little town, forget which little town it is now, as the only Jewish family there. but it is a very good telling of the experiences of Jews in little
Thank you.
towns in Texas.
Great, thank you. Leslie, did you remember what you wanted to say?
The influence of having grown up in the Air Force, we moved to a few different places, but we lived in Fort Worth for a good number of years in the 50s. And to know that the synagogue was such a central form and institution in the lives of so many, we ended up being at shul every day. There were like 3 days of Hebrew school. Then Friday night, my younger sister and I sang in the men's choir because no women participated. And Saturday morning, we go to junior congregation. And I always thought, this is before I could read Hebrew. I sat there and I'm sitting with all these older guys, and my book was upside down, but I was going to learn to read Hebrew. And then I was so impressed that at some point in the service, the rabbi and the cantor, who in those days were wearing robes, came in to visit the children in junior congregation. I thought, gosh, we're so important that the rabbi and cantor are coming here. And on Sunday, there was Sunday school, and my sister was the babysitter Friday night at services. And having all those activities related to the shul gave such a wonderful foundation. And had we not had that shul in Fort Worth, things would have been different.
All right, Eric, and then Martin. Go ahead, Eric, Martin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things about Wharton and the founding of the first Hadassah chapter there. The reason why there were Jews in Wharton in the first place, about 60 miles southwest of Houston, was because as part of the Galveston plan, Henry Cohen was funneling Jews to all these small towns in Texas, Wharton being one of them. So if you went to Wharton circa 1990, you'd find all these Eastern, Jews of Eastern European background. And the reason why the first Hadassah chapter was founded in Wharton back in 1914 or thereabouts was because Henrietta Zoll traveled there. She actually was going from city to city, and Wharton responded first to her, and so the chapter was established there. And for Hadassah members, it might be interesting to know that when the chapter was established, a number of the women made their infant daughters life members, and we honored three of those life members in 1990 at the last Israel Bond event in Wharton.
Nice, nice. Martin?
This is a book called Deep in the Heart. It's a pictorial history of Jews of Texas, and it's in the Brit Shalom Library if anybody's interested in it. I have my own copy because my grandfather is in it. He was a rabbi, and he served in Longview and Kilgore for 11 years in the 60s and 70s.
Right. That's one of the resources I used.
Okay.
Yeah. Judith, one last comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also have a book that nobody would want to have, but it's very interesting what it says, much of what you said, called Our Texas Heritage. It's Ethnic Traditions and Recipes. And it has a section on the Jews in Texas, and it talks about the Galveston movement, some of the things you said about why Galveston was chosen. It talks about Rabbi Henry Cohen and some other things, for like 4 or 5 pages. It has, Mexican Texans and German Texans and whatever. And then it's interesting, the recipes they have, what we would expect, like kugel, blintzes, borscht, and then some things that I'm like, that doesn't sound like a Jewish recipe to me. I don't know who put it together, but it does have a little bit of history of the Jews coming to Texas.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating. This has been a good journey. I've learned an awful lot in process. I also want to tell you about a 3 or possibly 4-part series that's coming up on April 3rd. this one session will be in person. The others will be on Zoom. April 3rd is Houston Jewish Funerals is coming here to do a presentation on end of life issues and how to prepare and what are the concerns. Following up on that, on April 10th and April 24th, and possibly, because I've not taught this before, I'm not sure how long it'll run. I might do a third week as well, but the 10th and the 24th, I will do a presentation on Jewish understandings of the afterlife. Some of it will be quite new. Some of it was quite new to me as I started to do my research. So I have to imagine it'll be quite new to everybody in the room as well. So April 10 and April 24, 10 o'clock, it'll probably be the same link, but we'll get information out. April 3rd is when the Houston Jewish Funerals will be here for that. Martin, I'll talk with you and we can coordinate. If the 3rd works, great. And if it doesn't, you can take some time from my sessions as well. Okay? Yes, Judith.
I don't know if you happened to see it, but I did that exact same kind of series with 4 sessions, and it was a Canadian Jewish organized. It was very interesting, just about a month ago, where they did end of life issues.
Right. Well, yeah, mine is really end of life. It's after.
Yeah. Well, the first one was preparing, wills and things, but they dealt with afterlife. I think that was session 3.
Yeah. I'm gonna do at least 2 weeks on the afterlife, if not 3. All right. Any others?
This was a great series. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
This has been wonderful.
I was gonna share real quick. My roots are from Port Arthur, Texas, and Beaumont. And if you can see, I was trying to find my picture. The synagogue in Beaumont, back in 1922, one of the stained glass windows is in memory of my grandmother, Lena Levy Bluestein. They didn't have a synagogue there. I grew up with the synagogue in Port Arthur, but my grandparents established a synagogue in Beaumont. If you ever go there, it's magnificent.
Also, for resource, there's a book called The Chosen Folk. It's written by a professor, I think at a college in Corpus Christi, whose grandfather, Edgar Cohen, was at one time the owner of the Jewish Herald Voice. So he had a lot of information from that, but it was a very interesting book.
And also Josh Furman through Rice University has this wonderful archives of Jewish history in Texas. And we took a course with him. He brought in objects that were very fascinating.
Yeah, I was going to say our department store was called Bluestein's. That's my roots. A small Port Arthur town they established. It was in business for over 50 years. Huge, big 5-story building in downtown Port Arthur that sadly has been torn down.
Oh.
If any of you have, I don't know, memorabilia or stories or whatever that aren't already with the Texas Jewish Historical Society, you should contact them and your local,
Yeah, go through Josh Furman. If you need that kind of contact information, we have some, because he's taken on a major project to do.
Well, I should say there have been books and so forth, and all of the cities. My father was part of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, and all of these big cities have ones that were started 50, 60, 80 years ago. And they, collect information. They like tape record stories. They tape recorded my father growing up, in Dallas, that kind of thing. And they have lots and lots of information.
Okay. Last comment, Leslie, you've got the final word.
Thank you very much. A very sweet memorabilia within the Wiener family. Sandy's mother's mother, Grandma Kaplan, when Fiddler on the Roof came out, she thought, this is great stories. I should write stories about when we came from Russia. So she went to University of Houston, took a course, and she wrote out on a spiral notebook all these stories about coming from Russia, getting settled in Houston, where they lived, how they sponsored people. And I was working downtown in an office on coffee breaks, and after work, I would type up all her stories. And then our uncle, blessed memory, Erwin Kaplan, had all her memoirs publish in a book and gave it to the families. And I'm thinking maybe we'll give that to Josh Furman.
Very lovely. Thank you all. A wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Bye.